Do you think?
And
Yeah.
that Hurlburt would openly study this in such a sort of positive. He's just listening to everyone. He's not imposing anything. He's not trying to change the world. He's not trying to do anything. He's not. He's wanting to understand what it's like to be another person. It's like a very raw form of phenomenological kind of empathy.
Yeah.
Almost, it's really really beautiful.
Right. Welcome. Your hosts for today, Vynn and Francis. Today we'll be talking about a book that Francis read recently, which is called.
It's called Investigating Pristine Inner Experience by Russell T. Hurlburt.
We're talking about this book. This is your book, Francis. How would you describe it?
It
What's it
is
about?
basically my favourite book I've read for years and years and years. It's probably in my top 3 or 5 books I've ever read.
Really? Why is that?
Yeah. I think it's because it's really interesting intellectually because it's talking about something no one's ever studied properly, and Hulburt is basically the first person to study in a reliable way the detail, the granular, interesting richness of mental experience in a kind of fairly authentic way. And yeah, there are potential flaws in his method, but generally speaking, it seems way better than any other method I've come across. So it's just quite a good, new, interesting thing. And then also, I find it quite emotionally connecting to humanity as well, which not all things that are interesting are emotionally connecting. But it makes me feel closer to people, and like the richness of our diversity of experience made me feel like good by the end, and kind of almost more positive for what we are as a species, which is cool.
So it wasn't just like an intellectual exercise. It was also an exploration of it was quite emotional, in other words, be able to feel.
Yeah, I mean, I read it in the right place. I was on holiday in Cornwall at a house with a couple of friends, and every morning I'd wake up an hour or two earlier than they did and go and sit in the window overlooking the sea of this old Methodist chapel cottage, and look out to the sea and read my book and drink coffee. And it just had this really nice vibe, and I was like, oh wow, there's this. I didn't know schizophrenics experience emotion like that. It would just be kind of interesting. I'd read a chapter each day, and it'd be really interesting, and kind of connecting. And I sit and think about
You just described the perfect holiday for me. Just like a peaceful holiday out by the sea, by the coast, and being able to read first thing in the morning before everyone's woken up. That's the ideal vacation for me.
Yeah.
But yes.
So what do you know about Hulburt? Can you let's start with that.
Well, I don't know very much about Hulburt. I just know that he's the guy who has a very special technique for interviewing people. And I think you told me about this. It's called Descriptive Experience Sampling, which I'm hoping to get you to talk more about. And I don't quite understand how his work differs from phenomenology per se. So maybe that's something we can talk about later as well. But to me, Hulburt is just, well, it's the emotion guy amongst many other emotion guys in my head. But yeah, well, tell me more about Hulburt. Why you think Hulburt's method is so different from phenomenology, and what makes it so much more unique?
The first thing is that no one's really, psychologists haven't really studied phenomenology in the 20th century, mainly because of this. There was a switch to behavioralism in the late 19th century, and people talked about what people do and their outward behavior, and they measure things that are objective, like do they get tricked by this optical illusion, which is somewhat objective, rather than asking what's actually happening just in their mind, what's happening with their inner voice, what's happening with their imagination, how do they feel emotion. And there's various reasons for that, which I'm sure we should find someone to interview about that in another podcast, just about that whole topic. But for the last 50 years, and he's very old now, Hulburt has been almost single-handedly in Las Vegas University in Nevada, trying to do better than that. And I think the key concept is the name of the book. It's this phrase, pristine. So he doesn't just want, if you do kind of armchair phenomenology, you just think, oh, how do I think? Do I, what kind of words happen in my mind? What do I see when I'm imagining? And without it's very biased to have that kind of conversation. People
Yeah.
get very limited by society and
Mhm.
expectations and what they think happens in their mind. Not many people even try to do armchair phenomenology, but when you do armchair phenomenology, you end up with the exact problems that happened in the 19th century, where one person will have a strong imagination and one person will have a strong inner voice, and these two philosophers will have an argument about whether thinking is about voices or imagination. And it's a spurious argument because they're each different, and therefore thinking isn't about either, or well, it's about both. So it's quite that this pristine word means trying to capture the actual inner experience in the wild. It's like studying a wild animal rather than a domesticated animal. Because if you try and do an experiment where you tell people to think away, or you just ask people to reflect on what happened to them in the past, there's lots of noise. They'll have forgotten what actually happened to them, and they'll re-remember it based on what society expects. They'll talk excessively about what they were doing and why, not about how they experienced it. I mean, when I say they, this includes everyone does this.
Right. So,
And yeah,
so there's a lot of like motivation and goals in the way we explain our experiences that make it less than pristine. And and what Herbert's
whereas,
trying to do is basically trying to catch like the experience in the wild, i.e., the pristine experience. And
yeah,
I think um, I read very briefly about this. Herbert kind of identifies five common aspects of what he calls pristine experience, and they happen to like map onto our sensory modalities. Like there's inner speech, inner seeing, feelings. I think unsymbolized thinking or something, and then sensory awareness.
yeah. So those are the most five common. So Hilbert doesn't really like categorizing them. He has done it in some papers, and there's a code book called the Descriptive Experience Sampling Handbook,
Yes.
which you can look at online. I recommend looking at. I think in that there's like 16 or 20 different ones, but the five most common are the five that you just said. But even just knowing that those five, like lots of people do, some people do them a lot, some people don't do them at all, is massive. But the categorizations came later. He does the experience sampling first, and it's like very raw anthropological research.
Yes.
He doesn't have a presupposition. He does what he calls bracketing presuppositions, which is to sort of hide any supposition about how people think. And he's very open-minded always. Every conversation he pretends it's completely new and he doesn't know anything about inner experience almost. And so he never asks people which of these things are you doing, or hears them half say something and then jumps. He always gets them to talk about it. And the basic, I mean, I should describe the basic process, which is he was an electrical engineer, and so in the 1970s he could make this random buzzer that you carry around when that was quite a hard technical thing to do before we had so much tiny computers and tiny circuits. And it has a headpiece with this piercing, high pitched like noise in your ear, and it goes off randomly, and you carry it around you during the day. And when it goes off, you're meant to immediately think about how you were thinking at the moment just before the beep. And he deliberately captures one moment, a bit like a camera trap firing, taking a photo in the jungle or something. It's deliberately one moment because that makes it. As soon as you go, what did you do over the last minute? You get distracted and you try to summarize and you try to conceptualize it. Whereas if you go, what were you doing at this moment? You have to describe what you're doing at that moment. So it makes people say much more interesting things and be much more open. So yeah, you write that down, and then the process is that a psychologist, usually Hulburt, but he's had lots of grad students, and there are a few other people who've done it, who then interview you with a very specialist interview technique he describes in great detail in the book. Some people might find that bit of the book a bit overly repetitive and forceful. It's like the first 9 chapters mainly just repeats information about how to do this interview process. It's more like doing therapy than it is doing a psychology experiment, because you're trying to coax out of people their pristine experience without saying something that makes them think that you want them to say a certain answer. Because it's very easy for an experimenter to ask leading questions or to make someone think it's socially unacceptable to have a certain experience, and then they suppress it and say a different experience. So he's got a whole thing being careful about all that stuff.
So this is what you mentioned before was bracketing presuppositions.
Mm,
Correct. So this method that you just described, this is the descriptive experience sampling method, which Herbert
mm,
came up with, and it's
yeah,
supposed to get at the pristine experience, the raw experiences, without superimposing any kind of presuppositions.
yeah.
Um, I find it really quite. I'm quite skeptical about this because like I'm not sure how any kind of description can escape some kind of presupposition, and this just goes back to the difficulty of like introspecting one's
Yeah,
mental state and how some people are a lot better at it than others, and
yeah.
I
Or think they are.
or think they are, yes, but I think I can confidently say that a psychologist or I think a shrink is going to be much better at this than like a 5-year-old. These types of things, it's hard to like give outright rankings and stuff like that, but generally speaking, the
Yeah.
older you are, you the more likely you are to be more skilled at introspection.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, there's a bit where he tries to sample kids. So there's a, I mean, there's a list at the end of like 200 constraints he calls them, which are things you have to do to make this work, things you should be aware of when you're learning the interview technique. And they're not really the list; they're more like a guide set of guides, and they cover all of this stuff like. Yeah, the plausible is the enemy of the truth. Don't judge others by yourself. Subjects say things that are not true. Concede incompleteness. Um,
It,
the exploration of pristine experiences of personal endeavor. Like these are things that come out of the chapters, and yes, it's not a straightforward process. It's not like a simple science experiment with
yeah,
data. It's
it's
subjective. I think. I think it's just a bit. It's just a bit weak to go. I mean, I think it's better than not doing it. Like
yeah.
vastly, it's so much better than not doing it. And the things he finds out seem to be genuine. Like he has found out experiences he didn't know existed. So quite often he confirms them. So he won't even give them a word or a name. He'll just hear what they say. And then maybe in a later sample, they have something similar. And then he'll ask more about it. And there's whole chapters that describe that for quite complex experiences. Like there's one near the end, into the floor, about someone who has a sinking experience. Well, she sinks into the floor of the library, and he's doing the interview with someone else, and they like unpack in various ways, and they have a recording of it, and then they remember what they thought of it, and it goes into great detail. But yeah, she actually did feel like her body was in the floor. She was sat in a library and was so comfortable, her legs like soaked into the floor, and she phenomenally experienced that they were in the floor. And the same person did things like she read a message. She was a student. She read a message from a boy who liked her, and then dropped her phone in shock. But she didn't actually drop her phone in shock. She just fully imagined she dropped her phone in shock.
Ah,
I don't know if you've seen Ally McBeal. There was a TV show where that kind of fantastical thing happened to the main character, who was a lawyer in the 1990s. So these are called like micropsychotic experiences. I don't think the word psychotic has negative meaning in this
did
context.
he use the term micropsychotic?
Yeah, they did. Yeah,
Oh,
micropsychotic
interesting.
experiences.
Wow.
So so she would experience where things happened in the world, but they represented an emotion, because obviously her emotion was she was shocked that this boy she liked had messaged her, and she had experienced it as dropping her phone, and that's an unusual inner experience. Hurlburt had never felt that experience. He hadn't found it before in any interviews. So I think the proof is that it does genuinely seem to build up like things that otherwise don't come up. And yes, there's a load of clear, obvious, interesting criticisms. I think he talks about all of them. I couldn't think of criticisms that he missed. And he's published whole books with Schwitz-Gable talking through the sampling and the flaws and benefits of it. My view is it's pretty damn good, and it's the best thing we've got. Would love it if someone came up with something better. But I think to criticize it and go, oh, we shouldn't do it because it's like better than all the previous techniques because it's got flaws still. It's like, well, it's still
I don't
the
know.
other two obvious things it found that were novel were unsymbolized thinking,
Yeah.
which no one ever mentions. Can you describe what that is?
So thoughts that occur without words, images, or any other symbols. Um, I'm not exactly sure what one means when one talks about unsymbolized thinking, because like, what is a thought that is not symbolic? Um, is what is a symbol even at this point? Is it just like
Yeah,
non-representational thinking? And I think this probably like leads you into like the nitty gritty of like the philosophy and the cognitive science of it. But I just can't imagine what this sort of thinking would look like.
does it not happen? I'm sure you do it.
Well, I'm sure even if I do it, I'm not sure if like it enters my awareness. Like I wouldn't be able to
Right.
recognize it as unsymbolized thinking. Um,
Yeah, I mean that's exactly why you need the random buzzer and to pay perception attention to it. I mean, I've tried buzzing myself half in a bad way, not doing it with the full process, just to sort of try it out, which is something Hilbert discourages. But I think it was still useful. And I definitely got moments where the beep happened and I wasn't thinking in words and I wasn't seeing pictures because I never see pictures and I wasn't experiencing emotion. I wasn't just listening to a podcast. I was thinking about a topic, but there were no words associated with that thinking. But I was ruminating on concepts about that topic that were more complex than I could easily put into words. I'd have to start being creative to write the words down. And
wouldn't
I
that be
think,
symbolic
yeah,
though? If you were
well,
having to
maybe the
divide
name's wrong. Yeah. I often call it to people just conceptual thinking, is
right,
quite often what I say. Unsymbolized is what Hilbert. I think unsymbolized just means they're not physical symbols we can write down and share. So
right,
you can't write down words or draw the picture or even
okay,
describe the feeling in your body.
yeah,
You can't do any of those things. Best you can do is convert the concept into words and explain it to someone else. But
right.
the actual thought is richer than the words. Like words are very limiting. We know there's more thought than is available in words. So yeah. Now that is not conceptual thinking. Being its own thing is not a thing that even people who thought about an experience tend to be aware of. But it turned out, and they only found it. It wasn't that Hulbert started out going, there are these 5 methods of thought. Philosophically, I'm going to do them. He started out interviewing people and finding out their pristine experience, and then in the course of doing that to hundreds of people, discovered that imagination, inner speech, emotion, sensory awareness, and unsymbolized thinking were all really important. So yeah, all good questions.
So how does he discover variability in these various like imaginative abilities?
Yeah, he would love to have more discovery of variability in it. I could sort of sense he never explicitly says it, but basically he's a bit sad that loads more people aren't using the technique and there isn't loads of funding to do more sampling. So he's done hundreds of people in his career and he's got loads of records of that. So he's learned a lot from that and done analyses of all the people and categorized it and stuff. I guess, and you can watch them on YouTube now. There's a YouTube channel he has where you can go and watch interviews from the last few years, like that they've recorded and published. Which I quite like doing. It's kind of fun. The early ones, he throws away the first couple of days of sampling because people aren't good at the technique and understanding how to describe things yet. But the later ones get more kind of interesting. Just qualitatively, it's like listening to lots of stories and going, well, people are all different because they tell different stories. If you actually listen to people's experience, you find it's quite different in different people. So partly it's just directly as a human listening to other humans' experiences, you find it's different. And then partly he's done some papers of data analysis going, this varies between people. He hasn't really focused on how does imagination vary specifically. It's much broader than that. I think it's much richer than that. My main experience of doing the sampling on myself was it was much richer than I thought. Even my relatively quiet mind, I have a relatively quiet mind. The
What were some
the,
of the
the
things?
complexity
Yeah.
of my experiences were rich.
What were some of the
The
things
thing,
that you surprised or that surprised you about yourself?
oh, that surprise. I mean, mainly it surprised me that I couldn't word it, if that makes
Right.
sense. So I've got a blog post where I wrote up what I found out.
Maybe we
I
can link that in the
think,
show notes later on.
yeah. I mean, I did find I mainly use unsymbolized thinking with some inner speech, some emotion, and little sensory awareness and no imagination, which wasn't a surprise to me. And
Is your inner speech audible? Like, do you have it in your mind's ear?
no, it's definitely articulatory. It's like I'm speaking inside my head rather than I'm listening. And I spend a lot of time, particularly then. I mean, at the time, I didn't have a job, and I distract myself by listening to podcasts or watching videos. And when I'm doing that, I don't have other thoughts, as far as I could tell, not very often, which is interesting. And I think that's like a more trying to cope. If I'm not happy, then distracting myself by taking in content is a thing that I can do. So actually I learned, actually it was really interesting seeing that, like a percentage number for that, because that made me think, just in terms of my own mental health, why am I doing that? Am I talking to people and journaling enough about my emotion? Am I just hiding from those things by constantly taking in content? So I found that really interesting. So I think, yeah, this is the cool thing about it. I think even just if we did it more, or we had some form of doing it ourselves, which is quite hard to do with the proper technique, I think just what I would learn in terms of improving myself would be really interesting. Yeah, there's a whole thing, scrolling. Yeah, they found out recently that it never happened before because smartphones are new, but there's literally an inner experience of just scrolling.
I have that.
And
I
like
have
I was doing nothing but scrolling. I wasn't thinking about the videos. I was just like they were scrolling. um, and I quite like that. I did just doing a lot of the time, which I really like. Quite often, I literally am not. I'm just doing. I'm just walking. I'm just programming. I'm not actually thinking actively, which is quite interesting. It
but
was
like
really hard to work out the categories. I'd often go, that's not a category. There's all this stuff. I had all these concepts in my head. I had this other stuff going on, and I can't describe it. I was often just like, fuck, this is complicated.
this is like a neural network.
Yeah. And I'm very bad. I'm not particularly aware of my own thinking. Like, I think an expert in meditation or something might be really good at being aware of their own thinking. And I think there's a rich, you can get quite a richness and complexity. And I think what I like about Hurlburt's work is it emphasizes that richness and complexity rather than trying to limit and categorize and reduce. So yeah.
Would you characterize Hurlburt's work as introspection training? Or
Yeah,
is a form
actually.
of introspection training?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. People love doing it. Like the people who you watch the YouTube videos of really like being interviewed and find it really interesting. I mean, there's a great chapter where he gets a consciousness scientist to be interviewed, like a person who researches consciousness, and the they get really excited. They find they were saying the word stufa instead of super in the speech. They had like a kind of almost linguistic error just in one early sample.
That's
And then
interesting.
they got really fixated on that and went, oh my God, that's like really bizarre. Like the way you think is different from what I thought. And they try to generalize because they're thinking about consciousness. They then try to generalize from this one experience, which they hadn't paid attention to that kind of
Yeah.
experience before. And yeah, it's really interesting. They were writing a book and they really struggled with just writing being an inner experience. So quite often they had no other thought, no concept in their head, no word, no imagery. They were literally words were coming out of their keyboard, and all they were doing was words were coming out. That was their mental experience. Was I'm producing words, and that's just writing. They hadn't realized that was a thing, but actually, I found I was doing that kind of thing quite often. Yeah, and it was almost harder to interview them because they were consciousness scientists because they felt their job was to generalize. But
Yes.
I think I genuinely think the academic consciousness studies is overly generalizing too
Yeah.
quickly before they've even found out what the variety of experience is of consciousness. Likewise, I think knowing the variety of experience of consciousness will inform what happens when you take psychedelics, what happens when you do meditation. I don't think you can understand what happens when you do meditation if you don't understand people's imaginations very hugely. And when you say imagine a candle, it'll be different for different people. Or when you say, oh, you suddenly become aware of this thing in meditation, I'm like, hang on, I bet you a few percent of people are always aware of that from birth. Like, how do you factor that in? How do you
Yeah.
normalize the person before they begin?
How do you generalize this?
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting. And I don't think it's, all the work happening on studying what happens when people take psychedelics, what happens in meditation is incredibly valuable, but I think it would be made more rich by having just a similar level of work on what happens normally. So, yeah.
And that seems to be like a common critique of Hurlburt's work, that it doesn't generalize, and just the whole premise of like generalization in psychological theories is and should be based on like average experiences,
Mm,
whereas Hurlburt isn't really so focused on average experiences so much as how
mm-hmm,
unique and how like anomalous our
mm,
experiences can be,
mm,
and that's really what the method
mm.
of his studies really brings out. It's just like the sheer
Mm,
idiosyncrasy of these
right.
individuals.
Which to me is kind of a lot of what our podcast is about. I mean, we've talked before about how emotional experience varies through history and between countries and things like that. And I think what I love about Hilbert is he's acknowledging that. He's constantly going, actually, mainly I've introduced, white American psychology students I've mainly
Yeah,
interviewed. So I don't know anything. People often ask him a question. He'll go, I've no idea. We need to go and sample some indigenous,
yeah,
rainforest people in
yeah,
Brazil.
yeah,
We've never done that. And yeah, no one will ever pick up like the inner experience you described of the shaman in our first episode we had of the shaman in Borneo who could see like spiritual entities in her like imagination, but profantasically. No one would pick that up in like you would have to find the right some people in the West probably have similar experiences, but it's taboo to talk about them and they would not say them if you asked them and so on. So yeah, I love that stuff.
that's that's a great callback to our first episode. But while we're on that as well, I think it's really interesting how Herbert manages to tease out so much variability, even from like that limited sample of like white college educated Americans in this very specific cultural context. What would happen if we started studying people
Yeah,
from vastly different
yeah,
cultural environments, like people from different histories,
yeah,
different cultures, um,
yeah.
even in like the so-called West, like people have not always experienced their inner mental states the same. Like we know that um,
Mm,
emotions that were much more prevalent in the medieval period are now no longer quite as common in the West. Things such as and things like gender dysphoria, for instance, that's definitely what the words don't really exist back then, but like I'm pretty sure that
mm.
this is something that has emerged and become much more prevalent as a result of like the culture just like soaking it up and making that more widely known. So
Yeah. Yeah, you're making me think. We talked about positive feedback on our podcast earlier, and the main piece I got was someone came up to me at Jess Camp this year, which was the retreat that we met at last year, and we went to the one this year. And someone there said, "Oh, I listened to your podcast." Like came up to me and she goes, "I listened to your podcast. And I really like the bit where you talked about emotion being like potentially imagination or embodied or bodily feeling
right, yeah,
or conceptual feeling." And I hadn't thought about that. And I had a couple of conversations with people there who were going, "Yeah, I experience imagination with emotion. I experience emotion with imagery." And I think it's relatively common to experience it with imagery, but people don't really talk about that because it's quite trendy to talk about bodily experience of emotion, which is also absolutely critical. But I also think conceptual experience of emotion is probably important. So yeah, there's a lovely, um, uh, there's a loveliness to this variety. Oh yeah, I was going to mention Julian Jayne. I'm not going to get into the origin of consciousness in the breakdown of bicameral mind, which is this famously controversial but compelling and never proven or disproven radical book from the 1970s claiming that humanity changed the way they experience consciousness. Like the current modern form of consciousness started in within human history, like about 2,000-3,000 years ago. And just imagine if we could go back and mind sample, the people of Stonehenge and see how they experienced the world
yeah,
and how it differed from people in ancient Greece and how that differed from Tudor England and how that differed from China today. That would be so interesting. But even if you narrow it to the kind of people that Hurlburt can easily find in Las Vegas to interview, he did loads of interesting studies with other people over the years. So, like one on bulimia, which found a very small sample, but they were radically different from other people. I mean, this is part of the proof that it works, is that you follow the same technique, which is very open-ended and doesn't presuppose or prime people, and you just get different reports that are consistent. So you get a bunch of bulimic people and compare them to some similar non-bulimic people, and you get a different experience. So bulimia is an eating disorder, and there's a paper about this you can look up, and in that they have a lot of multiplicity of experience. So they don't just get one intrusive thought about their body. They'll get in multiple modalities all at once. So they'll see imagery. They'll be thinking conceptually about a woman on a TV show. They'll be hearing things. They just get overwhelmed by like lots of thoughts about all sorts of things, partly about their bodies and food, but also just generally. They have multiple thoughts simultaneously a lot compared to most people. And that becomes overwhelming. And one of the reasons people who have bulimia this in the study, like vomiting, was because it gave them relief from that multiplicity of thought. So this is a really interesting insight, and it's not the main only important thing about that eating disorder, but it feels like an interesting critical thing to know if you're supporting people who are dealing with it. And that's just there in the diversity.
Yeah, yeah.
I really there's a chapter on schizophrenia. There's a paper about this as well. Really interesting. They have lots of, I don't know, what would you expect a schizophrenic experience to be like? Do you have an intuition for that?
I've read, and this is like based off reading R.D. Laing, who is an expert in like schizophrenia and who wrote about this in the 80s, that schizophrenics experience what they call derealization and depersonalization, which is when they feel nothing in their conscious experience is real. And I don't exactly know what it means to not experience something as not being real as opposed to like being real. Surely
Oh,
everything is
interesting.
either real or not real, and I don't know what makes something, what the dividing line
It
is.
has like the vibe of being fake.
Yes, or something like that.
I don't, yeah, that's an interesting one. Huh. So the things that came out, there's again a paper about this. Hulburt didn't sample many schizophrenics, but he sampled a few. They get emotions in their body a lot, but they're really specific. So they'll get like a feeling in their chest, but it'll be a particular shape. Like it'll be this tear shape around the center of their chest, and they can localize exactly where they're experiencing the feelings more precisely with more like subtle shaping within their body than most people. They get imagery to represent emotion. So, for example, like suddenly seeing people riddled with machine gun fire and it meaning you're angry or something. And I'll get a really intense, like a flash of that happening. There was a bunch of stuff that I think is probably reported already about tilted visual phenomena, inaccurate color and images, like distortions of stuff. Really interesting one because it's known that schizophrenics get hallucinations a lot, although I don't think of hallucinations in a negative way that people I'm now I've heard that prophantasia is a thing and imagination's a thing. Hallucinations to me are just another part of the brain imagining, but more intensely imagining within the real world. Although, of course, if they're happening without your conscious awareness or control, they can be very like hard. They can feel difficult for the person experiencing them.
Yeah, and
But
especially if
yeah,
they're undesirable, like visual
yeah,
hallucinations.
right. The example I gave about people being riddled with machine gun fire wasn't hallucination; it was in your imagination. But yeah, you can imagine if that got really tense and then you actually saw it, that would be overwhelming. The visual hallucinations aren't necessarily actually visual, which is really interesting. So what I mean is, they would go, oh, I could see this person or something, and then they'd be like, what color were their clothes? What color was their skin? What was their hair like? And they wouldn't be able to answer. And this wasn't always the case. Sometimes they would be able to answer, but sometimes, reasonably often, they wouldn't. And Hurlburt's sense from that was that they were hallucinating, believing the being was there, because we have other modalities, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I know there's someone behind me over there. I can hear this person. I know the person's there, but I don't know what they're wearing yet.
Yes. Yes.
That
Yes.
kind of thing. So they're really sure they're there, but they don't necessarily get a visual element in hallucination, although they can. So that was super interesting.
They can't give visual details, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's an interesting bit. It goes. We did the episodes we did on emotion. While I'm talking about that, this came up in that chapter. There's a bit where he goes into one of Lisa Feldman Barrett's studies about emotion, where she used a Likert type question. Strongly agree, disagree question with lots of, are you happy, are you sluggish, etc., etc. And Hulbert goes into detail about. He says it's a best practice of current psychology paper, but he feels like obviously they should be using more of this kind of methods.
Yeah.
and he says it misses that whether people describe emotion metaphorically or descriptively. Like it kind of it makes people conceptualize the emotion rather than actually describe what the experience of the emotion is, and I think that loses richness. Anyway, yeah, like I say, there's a whole section on that if you're interested in it. I think you probably I can't do it justice. I don't think. Yeah.
I find that really fascinating because like I don't know if I can describe my emotions in a way that doesn't rely on metaphors, even if the metaphors aren't um, even if the metaphors involve like emotional metaphors. So what I mean by this is I might be feeling peevish, but I'll instead of using the word peevish, I might say, "Oh, I'm feeling like I'm a bit angry," and that's kind of like a metaphor. Like I'm using uh, a more general term to describe a feeling that isn't quite the emotion, but like
Mm,
metaphorically, anger
but
uh, is
maybe you're
peevish.
describing a cognitive emotion though. So do you, if you've got an emotion, because if I've got an emotion in my body, even weakly, I can go, oh, my neck feels cloying or something. And I could
Right.
be relative,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So that's a bit more objective. Obviously, subjective, but it's objective in
Right.
the sense you can know the bodily feeling you're getting of an emotion.
Right. So it's just like much more descriptive in the sense that it's felt in the body. I get it. Right.
Or if you're seeing imagery, so someone who, like, I've talked to several, but there's someone Hulburt interviews in a first video, the one with Lena. She's called Lena, which is the first public video that Hulburt published of descriptive experience sampling. I think she gets this rosy colored glow in her head when she's finding something funny, and she goes, "Oh yeah, I always get that color. I just get the color when I feel something funny." And I talked to a colleague at work, and she said, "Oh, I always get multiplicity of emotions, and they're all represented by different splotches in my vision
Are these
of
people
different
aware
colors."
that other people don't experience emotions in the same way that they do?
Not very. I mean, they're about as aware as I was aware I wasn't aphantasic. I mean, I must have known I
Right.
was aphantasic. Sorry,
Yeah.
I must have known I didn't really have an imagination, but I didn't really. No one really talks about it, so you kind
Yeah.
of yeah.
You
So
were
no, not really. They're not very surprised. The colleague I talked to about this wasn't surprised when I said, "Oh, I'm doing this podcast about this topic," and most people there. It's relatively common, but it's not like I think 5 or 10% of people probably experience imagination with imagery. If I had to guess, I've like seen it a few times, not that often though. It's not like really common. Um, yeah, uh, yes, it's. So I think the richness. So yeah, the point, the benefit of DES, I guess, would be to get from you what's the part of it that's a bit more there's a whole section later on in the book where he talks about radical. I think it's the radical non-subjectivity chapter. No, that's not the one. That's the one about people with no experience. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's a bit where he talks about subjective and objective, and his viewpoint. Everyone goes DES. It's very subjective, and it's like, well, it's not actually. It's subjective in the sense it's only happening to one person, but it's objective in the sense that he's getting people to actually describe what happens, not to come up with a subjective opinion about what happens. And the process attempts to make it the best objective account of a one shot, one moment in time subjective experience. And it's quite a
mm,
subtle distinction, but I think it is quite important. So I think you could certainly describe your emotions with more richness of a specific emotion you felt at a specific time. You describe it more detail what the bodily feeling was and pay more attention to that and stuff, or describe what colors you see in more
mhm.
detail.
See, I still don't think that's quite objective, but I think I'll be lenient with it because Herbert is
it,
pioneering a new
it needs a
method.
new word, I
Yes.
think.
Yeah.
It's like it's a bit objective about something
Yeah.
subjective,
Because
but it isn't. Yeah.
it's not like scientific objectivity. But then again, we've established that this isn't
Mm,
aiming to be like scientific because it doesn't generalize.
I
So
mean,
it's
apart from MRI scans, like all study of the mind is subjective. So um, but yes,
right. So well, I suppose I should probably ask this question, but like, what does Herbert? use this for? Like, what are the study applications?
Yeah, I, I think like I say, I think he's behind the scenes, kind of sad that more people haven't adopted it and hence used it more heavily.
Yeah.
I haven't actually followed up on whether, because the obvious ones were he did a study of bulimic people, he did a study of schizophrenic people, he
Right.
did a study of, there's a really good one about adolescence and old age, and he goes and parks his car outside the house with a kid in it because the kid's really bad at writing things down.
Right.
So when the kid's buzzer goes off, the kid has to rush out the house to the car and then describe it directly to Hulburt, what he's experiencing. This is like for a 9 or 10-year-old. It's really cool. And he learns that kids make complex imagery slowly. So
Right.
he finds people who have imaginations think they instantly get the image. And the sense is from not very enough experiments that when you're a child, that's not true. The image builds up over time and you have to learn to build it up. But then you get quicker at doing that by the time you're an adult. And just like everything you do as an adult, you can do it really quickly when you had to spend ages as a kid. So that was really interesting. And then old people get black and white imagination.
Mm.
And they even realize they have, but you go, what color was that thing? They go like, well, there's no color or anything. And again, that's probably a mental decline leading to the brain going, well, I'll just not process the color anymore in my imagination or something. So anyway, yeah. So why was I talking about that? Because you were saying, yeah, the benefit he gets. So in theory, if you know more about bulimics or more about people in old age and more about schizophrenics, more about quite practical like circumstances like that should lead to a medical benefit potentially, where you can treat people differently. So a therapist could help someone with bulimia learn not to have a multiplicity experience. Maybe, I don't know. Who knows? There might be a new technique you could develop that changed how you treat it. I don't think that's happened in a way. I haven't seen anyone say that's happened yet. I think it would happen if we did it enough, and we haven't done it enough. I think the main reason he likes it is just the richness of human experience. And I think, yeah, he just loves hearing. He genuinely is excited about each person he interviews to hear what they're like. He's just like completely actually brackets his presuppositions. He's just completely like, oh, what's this person like? I just want to know this person at this moment in time, what happened to them?
So it's
And
mainly
it's just
driven like
like,
by curiosity then, right? It's like
yeah.
knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And
Well, there's a really good example about a virtuoso guitar player, a professional high-end guitar player who is his teacher. So it turns out the one personal thing about Hulburt, he hides his personal stuff a lot because he doesn't want it to distract people he's interviewing. But the one most personal bit of the book is the chapter 14 about this musician. And he's learning guitar from him. And the guitar teacher says, a key technique I was taught when I was learning was to imagine my fingers on the frets. And that helps me get better. And Hulburt's going, what do you mean? Do you see the fret? What color's the fret? How detailed is it? How do you imagine your fingers? And the guy's like, I don't know. And they have this conversation for years before Hulburt finally goes, I could do descriptive experience sampling on you and we could learn more what's going on here. And the guitarist agrees to this. So, and then they very dutifully do like 14 sessions, like 14 days with 4 or 5 samples each day and 14 interviews, not playing the guitar, just to learn about this chap's experience. And he has this beautiful, rich experience. It also has multiple experiences simultaneously, but in a much more positive way than the bulimic people.
right.
Like he'll be writing a MySpace page for his guitar playing. This was a while ago now, 15, 20 years ago. And his wife will be sitting next to him and he'll be sensorially aware of the contact of his hip against his wife's hip. And he'll be having a conversation with her. So he'll be just talking to her, but he'll have no awareness of what the conversation's about. And these things sort of ebb and flow. And he also had a lot of sensory experience. He was paying attention to the color of the brown of the tile. So sensory experience in the Hurlburt's categorization is when you're not, everyone is sensing all the time in the background, typically, like especially vision. But he's talking about when you're paying attention to a sensory detail. So you're not paying attention to the meaning of some visual input. You're paying attention to the actual imagery of the visual input. Or similarly with audio. So this musician did a lot more sensory awareness and a lot quite rich, complex multiplicity of experience. And then they got him to play the guitar. And not surprisingly, he has lots of attention on the exact feeling of his fingers on the strings, the exact sense of the music at a certain time. But he also has simultaneous distracting thoughts about other stuff going on at the same time. And then, yeah, this chapter culminates. They do a concert. Would you go to that concert? Yeah. Would you go to a concert where the musician's going to be sampled during the concert?
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay.
Um,
And what did he
so
find?
he plays the guitar.
What did he find? Go on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit wild. So they invite all these psychologists and guitarist friends to this concert, telling them 7 times during the concert a random beep will go off, the guitarist will stop playing, and then they will write down their inner experience and carry on playing.
That's
And then at
fabulous.
the end, we'll have a conversation about it. And Hulburt goes and interviews him. And they do this, and everyone sits there quietly every time the guy gets interrupted, and he just carries on playing where he left off. I mean, go and look at the book to see. There's a table with all the, there's a detailed description of all the sample. They got like 7 or 8 samples of the concert.
Yeah.
But he was very focused, but also very diverse. So he didn't have any distracting thoughts. Every thought related to improving the music. But those were the things he was aware of were extremely rich and varied. So sometimes they would be the particular reflection of a string. Sometimes they'd be the particular something about the music he was hearing. Sometimes they would be about how the audience was experiencing it, or something that might harm the audience's experience. And he had these in multiplicity. The sense is his mind naturally adjusts up and down what to pay attention to what's critical to make the performance better. And he was he was constantly focusing on whatever at that moment he needed to focus more on to make the performance better. And that was really diverse. It was and it goes into much more detail than that. But yeah. So it's kind of not a surprising result, but it's really interesting to know that's how you end up if you're really good at something.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It's mainly autonomous, but then you notice the bits where you're not doing it right, or the experience isn't right, or whatever.
Yeah, to do that throughout an entire concert as well, that's kind of like, that's pretty wild to me.
So the conclusion from Hulburt's point of view was that he didn't actually imagine his fingers on the guitar anymore. He probably did when he was first learning, but it had become autonomous. He didn't do that anymore. So Hulbert was like, oh, okay. So he started actually just looking at his fingers more and then trying to remember what they look like. And knowing you have to go through a process where the imagination disappears again. So you can start off by looking at something a lot to learn something, but then you can capture it in your mind's eye and start imagining it a lot. And then if you get really good at the thing, then the imagination can erode away. So very interesting. Again, if we did that kind of research on lots of people at different stages of learning different topics, we might be able to work out why people are blocked and go, hey, Francis, the reason you can't do X, Y, Z with music is because you have no audio imagination. You basically need to go off and develop an audio imagination as a separate thing you study before you can even begin to get this level of musical ability, for example. But no one in the past could have ever told me that. They'd just go, oh, you're stuck. Why are you stuck? Oh, well, just go and just do more computer programming.
Skill issue.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like
to, let's talk about Sonder instead, because I remember you recounting that when you were reading the book, you weren't just like, it wasn't just an intellectual experience. You also emotionally touched, and you realized how, I mean, at one point you teared up because of how touching the reading about people's experiences were. And this kind of like, in my mind, reminded me of an emotion that was coined by John Koenig in like the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, and it's called Sonder, which is the experience of other people living their lives as if they have their own.
Other people being aware that other people have a life as well that's similarly rich and complex.
Yeah. So having an experience as rich and as complex as your own. So
do these words get this dictionary? This is a really cool word. He just makes up really interesting words that are needed for concepts that people don't have words for.
I'm pretty sure he sticks to like words that, I mean, only words that he coins go into like the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, as opposed to like words that are just rare because they come from like a foreign language or whatever. So he tends to like he does tend to like pluck words from other languages, but um, he like creates like neologisms by like cutting and pasting words.
So when someone's experiencing Sonder, they're presumably not thinking about inner experience normally. What kind of thing are they normally thinking about?
I'm not exactly sure. I feel like they're going on about like the autobiographical experience um, of other people and imagining what
Mm,
their autobiography looks like and how other people might be having something similar to theirs,
mm.
but just as rich.
Right. Yeah, thinking about like yeah, all the stuff happening in my life, like who are my friends, what's happening with my relationships, how is my work, where am I going, how do I cook my food, what's it like walking down the street? Like all of these things happen to huge rich complexity of my life. So Sonder is realizing that you, Vin, you've been taking people on tours around Borneo, and you've got this experience of all these people and seeing all these amazing things that, and then that's a completely different experience. But you've got everyone has all this complex experience. Cool. It's a cool word. Have you felt it ever?
I feel like I feel it all the time, especially when I'm in like a more contemplative state of mind and I'm walking by myself.
Mm,
And I'm gazing off into the distance and I see cars moving by, or like I'm seeing people in a cafe talking to each other. I'm very offline. I'm like very disengaged from my own
mm,
concerns, and I get to like look at the world as if it were a TV screen. And that's when I'm like, oh wow, those people, they have their own stories. Um,
mm,
and so it's kind of like people watching, but taken to like
mm,
the next level. And
mm.
and I'm only in that state of mind when I'm alone and I'm like not talking to someone. So
That's
yeah,
really cool. So when I was sat in Cornwall in the window seat of this old chapel, looking out to the rich blue sea, and it was really sunny, and I could see the hills and the mountains, and I was reading the book, and yeah, I had this particular moment. I'm not sure I recorded which chapter I felt it in, but I was obviously thinking about how how many people there are, and how they're going about their lives,
yeah,
and what they experience is so varied and so interesting and so rich and so human, and so it's so having just read chapter after chapter about different people, and I loved reading the descriptions of a sample. I'd be
yeah,
like, oh great, it's quoting what someone experienced at this one moment in time. So excited, we get so excited, and the culmination of that over chapters and chapters and chapters just left me, just there was a moment where I just got this very intense beautiful joy feeling,
yeah,
which actually I can't phenomenologically explain, ironically, now
yeah,
I've forgotten. It would be great if I'd written it down at the time. Very strong, beautiful feeling, very emotional, where I felt connection to like everyone in the world in some sense, and our variety and uniqueness, but simultaneously our humanness. Because it's very connecting, because I feel more, it makes it easier to empathize when I know what someone's experiencing. It makes it much easier to understand what they're like and who they are in this much more personal way than just knowing what they do or how they behave. It felt like more getting into who they are, because I think this whole thing of phenomenology is a part of who we are that is under talked about, and it's not the only thing that matters. You can feel Sonder without thinking about inexperience, but I got a very strong sense of Sonder from thinking about everyone's experiences being so unique and beautiful. And there'll be overlaps and there will be differences. And I found this really reassuring. Like I kind of liked humanity more because of it.
sort of restore your faith in humanity a little bit. Just
Yeah.
do you think?
And
Yeah,
that Hulburt would openly study this in such a sort of positive. He's just listening to everyone. He's not imposing anything. He's not trying to change the world. He's not trying to do anything. He's wanting to understand what it's like to be another person. It's like a very raw form of phenomenological kind of empathy,
yeah.
almost. It's really, really beautiful.
Do you think that this is similar to the experience one gets from reading a piece of literature, especially one from like the first person point of view, where you enter into like their mind and you see what they're imagining, what they're planning.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's more detail about one person, but yes, yeah. So I've watched series of like 6 or 7 or 8 interviews with one person. Like there's one with the author Michael Pollan on Hulburt's YouTube, for example, and you really get to know them because they're giving you random events in their life. So oh, Michael Pollan goes to the bakery every morning because he got sampled in the bakery twice, and this kind of stuff. So you also get background information, but it feels like you get a more interesting sample of what it's like to be them than if they just told you narratively, because the narrative is always sub-selected. It misses what we're doing most, because typically I'm only aware that I'm doing most of my time have a weird, a random kind of irrelevant experience that you would never tell in a story to someone. But when you hear other people's ones, it makes you go, it's not just me. It makes you really know it's not just me with this experience going through the world. Everyone has this experience going through the world. And most of that doesn't become a story or a narrative. Most of that is everyday life. But that's what everyday life is made of. Walking down the street, pay attention to the sunlight landing on your skin.
Yeah.
Everyday life is made of washing up and being distracted by thinking about your lover. Life's made of those experiences, summed together. So yeah.
Cool. And with that,
There you go.
I think we should just about wrap it up. Like, what a lovely message to
Yeah.
leave our listeners.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great book. So just to remind you of the name of the book, it is called Investigating Pristine Inner Experience, Moments of Truth by Russell T. Hurlburt. But we'll put loads of links in the show notes to the things we mentioned, and lots of those will be shorter articles to read that are about Hurlburt. And in terms of feedback, it would be great if people could email us. We're imagine@flourish.org, or on Twitter/X, we're @imagine_Apple. If you found anything interesting in what we said in the episode, or you have a reaction to it, or you would want to be sampled or something like that, it'd be great to get a message.
Give us a call. We'll do an episode.
Yeah. Would you do it, Vynn, if I had a way of doing proper descriptive experience sampling on you? Would you volunteer?
Sure. I mean, if you have like the structure and you're ready to go, then I'm ready as you are.
I'm wary of doing it without doing it properly, but at the same time, I think even doing it half badly is still more useful. I don't think it's scientific. I think you have to do it properly to get the proper results.
It's like an ethnographic study. You just talk to people and like get them to like talk about stuff.
Right,
Cool.
It's a whole skill. It's exactly a similar skill, yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Great. Thanks, Vynn. And have a beautiful rest of your day.
And that's a wrap.